going. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. If you are new to Lansing Codes, welcome. I strongly encourage everybody to check out the Lansing Codes Slack channel. So slack.lansing.codes. There's a lot of conversation going on there. There's also the Lansing.codes website where you can see all the upcoming meetups. I'm not so good at keeping up with them right now. I know there's a kids-focused tech demo next week at Tinker Labs at Meridian Mall. Next month for the DevOps meetup, we're going to have somebody come and talk about Google's Compute Cloud, which is something I'm completely unfamiliar with, so that'll be fun for me to learn some new things there. And tonight we are very lucky to have Chris DeMars. So he is a Microsoft MVP, a global speaker, an expert on many things. If you like what you hear tonight, go Google him. You'll find the way I found him was actually through the Six Figure Dev podcast. He's interviewed on there. A really cool interview. And so with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chris.
Cool. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. How many people are in the room? How many we got tonight?
We've got 7 right now. I think there are at least a couple more that RSVP. So
sweet. Awesome. Cool. Glad to see it. All right. So before I start, I am doing this remote. I actually just moved to Denver. I'm from Detroit. I moved to Denver. I'm actually flew back home to Detroit. So I'm actually in Detroit this week, but only still be able to do this remotely. So it's going to work a little bit differently. Usually for my conference talks, meetups, when I'm there in person, I'm really loud and I move around a lot. So I'm going to move around a lot in my seat, which is going to be kind of funny for me. But I'm a huge accessibility advocate. So I'm going to ask questions during this talk. And if you can't raise your hand or move your arm for whatever reason, give me a wink, give me a nod, hit me up on Twitter if you want, and we can talk, or you can just, we can BS about whatever. So with that being said, and Twitter being a huge thing, how many in the room are actually on Twitter? Raise your hand. Wow, almost everybody that I can tell. That's great. I've given talks before in a room full of a bunch of people, and maybe 5 or less are on Twitter, and it kind of blows my mind. Because I don't know how people stay in touch with the developer community when they're not on Twitter, especially going to conferences and talks and keeping up with the events that are happening. So that's really, really cool. So that kind of leads me into the whole entire spiel. So a huge thank you to Lansing DevOps for having me. Thanks for reaching out. This is going to be really fun. We're going to have a good time. So yeah, let's get started. I believe this is the official hashtag, Lansing Codes. So if you're doing Twitter during this, if you are tweeting or anything like that, use the hashtag Lansing Codes. That'll be a lot easier, make it easier to find the event and stuff like that. Also, another one that I'm super huge about is hashtag developer community. I love the developer community. And why do I love the developer community so much? Well, everybody that's in this room right now, you are all my lifeblood. I do what I do for the developer community. I speak all around the world. I give talks on accessibility. I give talks on CSS. I give talks on front-end performance. I spoke at 22 events last year, just alone. And I didn't get burnt out. I felt the burnout this year, but I got a lot of questions as to why. Why do you do so much? Why do you sacrifice so much of your time? And it's for you. Realistically, it's for you. That's why I write about the web. I guest on podcasts like the Six Figure Dev podcast. I host my own podcast. I do it for the developer community. So when you're also tweeting or taking pictures or whatever the case may be, if you throw developer community on there, I'd really appreciate that as well. So this next slide that I'm going to show, and it should play, this is from Apple, and I always show this video before every accessibility talk that I give. I give a handful of accessibility talks for context, but this is from Apple. I'm not paid by Apple. I don't work for Apple. I'm not sponsored by Apple, but I like showing this video before all my accessibility talks, just so you can kind of get the understanding about the bigger picture, the reason why I talk so much about accessibility, I advocate so much for accessibility on the web, and why everybody should really care. So with that being said, I'm going to play it for everybody, and I just want to kind of get your take on it afterwards. Everybody hear it? Cool.
People think that having a disability is a barrier. But that's not the way I see it. You can catch up with friends.
Ready?
You can capture a moment with your family. One face, small face, focus lock. And you can start the day bright and early. You can take a trip to somewhere new.
3 miles to the summit.
You can concentrate on every word of a story.
A bird began to sing. Jack opened his eyes.
You can take the long way home. Or edit a film like this one. When technology is designed for everyone, it lets anyone do what they love, including me.
So what did everybody think about that video?
It's amazing the things that have to be accomplished in order to gain access to some of the technology.
Yeah. It makes you think, right? It lets you see the bigger picture. All too many times, in my opinion, of course, I feel that we build stuff that we think is cool. And, you know, I'm a victim of it. Especially when I started long time ago, like black background, lime green text, or like purple text, like that was the cool thing to do. That doesn't work for people anymore, right? And even at the companies that we might work at, you know, the design team, marketing team, they don't really have what the user is looking for. They don't have that in mind. They're not looking at the bigger picture when it comes to designing accessible user experiences and shipping accessible user experiences. We build stuff that we think is cool. The kicker is that we don't matter. They matter. The people out there matter. The users in the outside world. Now, with that being said, if you do experience some type of disability, yeah, it does matter for you, because at some point you're going to be using that technology as well. But we really have to start being cognizant of looking at things on a more grand scale. And that's kind of why I show this video, just to show that, you know, we aren't the only ones here. The web is a huge, big world, and we're just a small little piece of it. This is another cool thing I like to show off. I show little tidbits of accessibility things, whether it's digital accessibility or just, you know, accessibility out there in the real world. But this is Michael Soooooo. This picture was taken 77 years ago. This is actually at IBM. So IBM hired Michael Soooooo to create a program for recruiting and training people with disabilities. So it's pretty cool. IBM's doing a lot in the accessibility space for a very, very long time. And they're still kicking ass in the accessibility space. So if you aren't following IBM right now on Twitter or whatever social media, definitely give them a follow, because they are doing amazing things in the accessibility space. So why? I get this question a lot. Why do you care so much about accessibility, Chris? And the answer for me is kind of simple. So my mom is of the baby boomer generation. She still has a flip phone. She wouldn't know what to do with a smartphone if, you know, it had huge numbers on it, whatever the case may be. She has trouble turning on her TV sometimes, right? But she's of the baby boomer generation, so she's in her 60s. She just celebrated a birthday in May. So my mom when I talk to her, I have to speak loud in order for her to hear me. Right? So she has some hearing disabilities going on. So that's number one. She wears glasses. She has trouble seeing. There's number two, visual disability. She has trouble writing. She shakes when she writes. She has arthritis. Those are what we call mobility disabilities. So that's number three. I can tell my mom, I could have talked to my mom yesterday and told her I was doing this remote meetup. And then I could have talked to her again today and she'd ask me, what am I doing tonight? She'd have no clue that I told her this. But she can remember an event from September 13th, 1977, like that, like the back of her hand. Cognitive disability. So she has trouble remembering things. She has trouble comprehending certain things. Now, knock on wood, the fifth type of disability that we encounter on the web out there in the digital world is what I call, or what we call, temporary impairments. They used to be called disabilities, but a few advocates out there, were started saying, they're not disabilities, they're impairments, because they will get better. The situation will improve over time. And temporary impairments are kind of like a broken hand, a broken finger. So those are some temporary impairments. It'll heal and you'll get better. But one major one that a lot of people overlook, and this question goes out to the room, is how many have been a parent with a newborn child and have had to work on their computer and couldn't put their kid down? Right? That's an impairment. That is a temporary impairment. Most people don't think about that though. And yeah, your child is going to get bigger. You'll be able to set your child down. They'll be able to run rampant on your house and tear things apart. But at that time, you have a screaming newborn and you have to work. You got to put in some extra hours, or there's something you have to do on your computer. You can't hold your child, use the mouse and use the keyboard at the same time. I guess nowadays you can, because they have like the baby holsters, like the saddles or whatever, which are pretty cool. But when I was younger, my mom never had that, right? So that's another type of impairment that we're kind of working towards in the accessibility space. So out of those 5, my mom is suffering from 4. If I can make an accessible user experience for her at the end of the day, I've done my job. Flat out. That's my why. And I hope after this talk is over that you can go back and reflect on what your why is. And if you don't already fully understand the importance of accessibility on the web, maybe that will kind of springboard you into that kind of whole space. So thank you all for coming. This talk is called Focusing on Focus. We're going to talk about focus styles and accessibility, CSS and accessibility to be more exact. You can find me on Twitter at Salt and Burnham. So if you are a Supernatural fan, you'll understand that reference. You can also go to my website. I have like a link to my Medium if you want to read about the ramblings I talk about the web. I'm going to actually be moving that over to Gatsby here soon. So yeah, tweet that, follow me, find me, pictures, whatever the case may be. My name is Chris. I'm a front-end developer. I work at TUFT and Needle. Does anybody know what TUFT and Needle is? Mattress company. It's the original bed-in-a-box mattress company. And in being in Michigan, there's signs and billboards all up and down 94 and 75. But if you don't have a TUFT and Needle mattress, I suggest you buy one. So hint, hint. Just going to drop that out there. We do sell mattresses. We sell linen sheet sets. We sell pillows, frames. We just released an adjustable frame, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that's the company I work for. Our HQ is in Phoenix. I work remotely. I was in Detroit, like I said. Now I'm in Denver, but right now, technically, I'm in Detroit. I used to have a handful of slides that kind of talked about me, not because, I like being selfish and I'm full of myself, but to kind of level with everybody in the room and to let you know that I'm human too. I'm a person. I had slides on like tattoos because I'm covered in tattoos. I love horror movies, so I had a slide on horror, and I had a slide on Detroit, and I had a slide on community, all these cool things. Because you might not care about this talk, but you might be a fan of horror. And if you didn't know I was a fan of horror, we couldn't have anything to vibe on. And I got some feedback one time from an event, and the feedback kind of was like, hey, Chris, we don't care about you. We care about your talk. So with that being said, I kind of removed all of that information. And I didn't feel the same giving my talks anymore because I didn't feel like me 100%. And it hit the feels and it hurt really bad when I got that feedback. But earlier this year, I decided, you know what, screw it. I'm going to put all that stuff back in. So a little bit more about me. I'm a Google developer expert in web technologies, like Brendan said. I'm also a Microsoft MVP in developer technologies, international speaker, founder of View Detroit, which is a View meetup in Detroit, which I kind of had to hand over the reins to one of our other members to take over. I'm also an Oracle Groundbreaker ambassador, host of Tales from the Script, which is the podcast I host, and I love tattoos and horror. So either way, tattoos and horror was going to make it into this talk one point or another. So if you love tattoos and horror, hit me up on Twitter. We'll talk. I'm going to see Annabelle this week. I'm super stoked about that. So this is my podcast, Tales from the Script. You can check it out on Twitter, TalesFT Script, the website, tftscript.com. You can listen on the web. You can listen on the podcast app for Apple, Google Play, Stitcher. I still have to get it on Spotify. I haven't recorded in a while because last year I had so many conferences, I just didn't have the time. But now that I'm still getting settled into Denver and getting things set up, I'm going to start doing episodes again. And if you want to be on it, if you want to talk about front-end stuff, definitely hit me up. We'll get you on and get you out there for the developer community. So this is my favorite part of the talk here, question time. So I know this is like a DevOps meeting, but do we have any possible designers in the room? Raise your hand. No. What about front-end devs? Okay, cool. What about back-end devs? All right. Any QA, BA, or stakeholders? Okay, cool. How many work on accessibility? More hands than I would assume. Okay, sweet. So that was a test. And if you didn't raise your hand, the door, I can see it. There's an exit sign. The door's back there. Just kidding. But that's a test. I like to see how many people actually, in their varying roles work on accessibility. Because accessibility, if you are doing anything on the web and you're creating and shipping experiences, accessibility is your priority no matter what. It is a moral obligation. And it all starts with design. It doesn't just lay into the hands of the front-end developers or the back-end devs or the stakeholders. It starts with design. Your designers have to understand web content accessibility guidelines or WCAG guidelines. Your designers have to understand color contrast ratios and what those are. They don't have to understand the algorithm behind it, but they have to understand what looks good, what doesn't look good, what passes. They have to kind of understand Tabindex. They have to understand user flow. They have to understand the document object model, the DOM, a little bit. They don't have to know it completely, but they have to know a little bit of how the DOM works and how a web page is structured with a browser. It starts with design. And then once the designer hands it off to the front end, then the front end can do their part. But if you have any hand in the web experience, it is your job to care. It is your responsibility to care. So that's kind of like a test I do every talk, is to see how many people actually work on accessibility in their workplace. So according to the World Health Organization, this is an older statistic. This is from a couple years ago. This number has increased since then. 20% of people around the world have some type of disability. Now that's a small number, right? It's only 20%. 20% isn't a big number. Side note, I'm also trying to refrain from swearing during my conference talks and meetups, so hopefully I don't slip up. I'm just trying to keep it more clean, I guess you could say, because I do swear a lot in my talks, but I get really passionate during all of these events. So yeah, 20% of people. 20% doesn't seem like a big number, and realistically, it's not a big number. But when you turn that into a whole number, there are 7 billion people around the world, give or take. 1.4 billion of them have some type of disability. So now when you take that 20% and convert it into a whole number, that number is a lot bigger. So 1.4 billion people around the world have some type of disability. Out of the 5 and maybe more different types of disabilities that we're trying to target on the web to help users with. So yeah, food for thought. Just think about that for a little while. Who has heard this term before, A11Y or ALI or ALI, in the context of web and software? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. Do you know what this combination of letters and words, not what it means, but what it's called, like the actual technical term for what this combination of letters and words is called? Because most people don't. If you know what it is, shout it out. Nothing? Okay. That's good. It's called a numeronym. And what a numeronym is you take the first letter. Let me see if this will work so everybody can see. You take the first letter, you take the last letter, and you count all the letters in between, and you get the term A11Y. It stands for accessibility. The technical term is called a numeronym. You've seen this out in the wild elsewhere. So if you do any type of internationalization work, the term I-18N is a numeronym. If you do any type of localization work, L10N, that's a numeronym. And even if you're doing Kubernetes, K8S, if you've seen K8S, that is a numeronym. So you have these different numeronyms. You have K8S, I-18N, L10N, and A11Y. Those are numeronyms. So if anybody ever asks you, like, oh yeah, I know what that is. I learned that in a meetup. That's a numeronym. Now you know. So if you ever hear anybody talk about A11Y or ALI or ALI in the term, in the context of web and software, not in the context of being a male ally in tech, 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, they're talking about web accessibility. So yeah, so let's keep going forward. So what is it? What is accessibility? That's a great question, but more specifically, what is web accessibility? That's what we're kind of here to talk about today, is web accessibility. So according to the W3, they like to say this. Web accessibility means that people with disabilities, can use the web. But I don't like this definition. And there's a reason I don't like this definition. So this is where like the shouting, yes, Chris, is going to come into play. This is an open web, right?
Yeah.
Sweet. Did everybody eat too much or in a pizza coma? The pizza looked really damn good, by the way. You guys got any beer in there? Or you guys just got popping water?
Not
On campus.
Oh, that sucks. Damn. I know. I wish I had a beer right now. I'm planning on getting some after this. So yeah, this is an open web, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And an open web is an inclusive web, right? And inclusive web means web for all. That's what we're here for. With that being said, this is much more like it. Web accessibility means that everyone can use the web, right? The key word being everyone. Everyone should be able to have a great experience, whether they have a disability or not. We do have to pay very close attention, though, to all those different facets of disability that we're trying to target, right? Because we have to make sure that we're creating amazing, accessible user experiences for everyone. The web was not built with a single type of person in mind. And good thing Sir Tim Berners-Lee is still alive, because if not, with some of these experiences out here, he would be rolling in his grave. But the web was built for everybody, so we should be creating accessible user experiences for everyone, not just people with disabilities. Here's another one from webaim.org. I really like this one a lot. The web is not a barrier to people with disabilities. It is the solution, right? The key term out of this whole entire thing being solution. It is our job to come up with solutions. That's why we get paid. That's why we have the passion in this industry that we do, is to come up with solutions, right? We aren't here to just get a paycheck and just say, hey, you know what? I'm done for the day. It is what it is. If it works, it works. If not, oh well. There may be some people out there. I have worked with people like that in the past. But it's our job to come up with solutions. That's why we do the things we do, right? And by solution, I'm not saying we're building separate experiences for different types of people. That's not what we're doing. We're creating one solution for everybody. And now I've seen on the web websites and companies that have accessibility simulators in their experiences, and those are really cool. If you ever come across a website that's like that, you can choose like the fonts and the colors. If you have color vision deficiency or you're colorblind, Really, really cool stuff. But we're building solutions, right? It's not going to be a barrier to people with disabilities. It shouldn't be a barrier to anybody. So if you do have your hand in the web at any capacity, from designer to QA to stakeholder, it is your job to create these solutions. So what happens when you don't create an accessible experience for your users? And I'm looking high level, but I love listening to what everybody says, everybody's opinions, but I'm looking for one thing that's high level. But shout it out if you know what happens when you don't create accessible user experiences for people out there.
One obvious thing would be lose potential customers.
Lose potential customers. What else?
Prevent them from using, or like not even lose, but prevent them from using it the way it was designed.
Yep, that's one. What else? Think really high level.
We exclude people.
That's one.
I was thinking along the same lines. As you're excluding people, you're skewing your perception of who your user base is.
Yep, that's another one. What else? I'm looking for one more really, really high level. One that I kind of always use to like not beat around the bush with. Come on.
You're gonna upset people. You're gonna get some people upset, angry.
You will. You'll probably get your financial and lawyers upset too, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because lawsuits happen. Lawsuits are real. I always kind of go straight to this. I never beat around the bush and say, your users are going to have a bad experience. That should be a given. You can get sued. It's a very huge possibility. How many in the room are artists? Painting, pottery, drawing, whatever the case may be. If you're an artist, raise your hand. I can't draw to save my life, even though I'm full of tattoos. So BLICK Art Materials, they were sued because their experience was not accessible to their users. Winn-Dixie, we don't have Winn-Dixie up here. We have Kroger and Meyers. But Winn-Dixie is more south grocery store. Winn-Dixie was sued because their experience wasn't accessible. Red Roof Inn was sued because their experience wasn't accessible. How many in this room work in financial tech? It could be any financial tech company or mortgage company. I used to work for a mortgage company. Okay, good. Nobody will sue me for saying this. Bank of America was sued. One of the biggest banks in the United States, right? Just because your company makes billions and billions of dollars and could potentially rule the world does not protect you from accessibility, ADA compliance, ADA guidelines, accessibility guidelines. It doesn't matter. If you don't have an accessible experience, the potential to being sued is pretty high. This is a chart. I always love showing this chart. I love talking about this chart. This is from the SafeParth Law website, 2017 website accessibility lawsuit recap, a tough year for businesses. So federal website accessibility lawsuits by state in 2017. The number there's three numbers on here I want you to really focus on. 814, 325, and 335. 814 is the total number of lawsuits nationwide in 2017. 814 lawsuits. That blows my mind. That is an unacceptable number. That's almost 2.5 federal website lawsuits a day in 1 year. And the two biggest numbers, and that's just from 9 states and Puerto Rico, right? The two biggest numbers coming out of Florida and New York. Now, why do you think the numbers are so big in Florida? This is another one of those things where I really like to hear everybody's opinions on why these numbers are so high.
Retiring.
There you go. That's the one thing I go to. We're all from Michigan. When it gets cold, we're older. Where we wouldn't want to go? Florida, right? So yeah, that could be a huge factor, is that Florida is of an aging population. There's more federal website. There's more lawsuits. That makes sense. What about New York? Why do you think the numbers are so big in New York?
Number
more lawyers.
Lawyers, that's one. I hear that. What else?
I think it's a lot of the financial headquarters are there in the tech company.
Yep, that makes sense. What else? Regulations could be one.
And the city itself, I think, is actually pretty accessible. So it might be a good place to go for somebody who needs to make a choice between a big city that might have accommodations versus a small city that doesn't.
That could be it too. Yeah, but I think I might have heard somebody say the amount of people, right? New York is a smaller state, but there's a lot of people packed into New York. But Chris, California is a big state. There's probably more people in California. Not really. If you really think about it, a lot of the states and a lot of the cities west of the Rockies are kind of newer, right? They're still younger cities. There are a lot of people in New York. So many people, in fact, there are people that live underground in New York. So that could be another reason as to why that there are so many federal website lawsuits, because there's more people packed into New York than there are, say, California. More people with disabilities, potential for more federal website lawsuits. But this number has to change. 814. When I came across this last year, the year before, it blew my mind that we could actually have that many different, that many federal website lawsuits in 1 year. It's a little daunting. But moving on. So focus, this is what we're here to talk about. We're going to talk about focus. What is focus? Well, first off, it's a pseudo class in CSS, and a pseudo class is written like this: colon, and then the name. Now, a pseudo class is a class that can be added to another class to give it some type of visual indication that an action is being taken. So we have focus, we have hover, we have active, we have visited. These are all different examples of what a pseudo class is. Focus gives the visual cue that you are interacting with something on a page, some type of element on a page, maybe a button or an input or a link. So focus is what that is for. So why do we need it? Well, there's a handful of reasons as to why we need it. And this is a really, really great question. But one reason we really need it, and I like to show this off in the next slide, is for users that have like a field of vision impairment. Is anybody familiar with two blind brothers, or have they heard about two blind brothers? No. So two blind brothers are brothers. They have this shirt company, kind of an apparel company, and there's the brothers right there. And they have this simulator at the bottom. What these brothers experience every single day is Stargardt's disease. It's a type of macular degeneration of the eye. And this is the simulator and how they see things every single day. Now you can also view this on mobile as well. There's a simulator on mobile. This type of field of vision impairment is called central. There's three different types. You have central, peripheral, and other. It's really called other. That's like the technical term. But the way this is that it's not going to get better. This is a low vision impairment. Low vision is you're stuck with low vision for the rest of your life. Poor vision, on the other hand, can be corrected with glasses or contacts. Low vision is it will never get better. Eventually, this spot in their eye is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger until it's completely blacked out and they're completely blind. In the case of focus, let's say that you had possibly an input or something and it was over here to the side and you couldn't focus to it using tab and you didn't get an outline around that. That could cause potential problems when you're trying to interact with that experience. On the other hand, if you did have focus around that and you did, tap to that part of the experience and you knew exactly where you were in that experience, you'd be able to use this experience in a better way, in a more accessible way. Whereas if you didn't have that, it wouldn't work as well. And I actually had somebody talk to me about this with an example that I usually talk about with passwords and logins. And they said that one time they were putting in a password and a login and a password to log into some type of shopping experience or something. And apparently focus was completely removed from the experience. Muscle memory, they tabbed down to type their password in and they got distracted. And when they looked back and that's where they thought they were typing their password, they didn't have focus there. So they were typing, but they didn't know where their password was going. And they were really worried about it. Luckily, knock on wood, nothing happened. And that's a very, very high level type of example. But it happened to somebody in the audience before, and they came up and talked to me about it, and I kind of empathized with them a little bit. That's high level, but that's why focus matters. You need to see what you're interacting with on the page. So I always love showing the two blind brothers and kind of showing how they see things every day. And side note, all of the money that they do make, all the proceeds go to a blind foundation. So that's really cool. How many have been in a situation like this? Developer versus designer. I have every single day for my whole entire career. There are times when a designer or an art director or a product owner could approach you and say that, that outline that renders around certain elements of the page, like links and buttons and, where you type your password and stuff like that, or maybe you're like, that box that you type things in, that doesn't look good. And it doesn't match our branding, and can you just remove it? And then, being on the other side of that argument, being the developer, you could follow up with have to replace that outline around those elements. And if they look at you confused, that is a great time to open up the communication of the importance of focus and what you can do collaboratively to make that experience accessible. So if you're going through your code base, or you're given maybe doing like a refactor or something like that, or you're given mockups that don't have focus styles around them, you might see something like this where focus outline is set to 0 and focus outline set to none. Don't do it. Please, please, please do not do this. If your outline is set to 0 and your outline is set to none, make sure you put that focus back in. By removing the outline, the focus outline, you're not only removing it for your mouse users, you're removing it for your keyboard users, and you could possibly be removing it for your other assistive technology users. Users coming from a sip and puff machine, users coming from a braille machine, a tap machine. You remove it for one, you remove it for everybody. So please, please, please do not do that. Make sure you define those focus styles later down in your style sheet. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. How many in the room are familiar with a CSS reset or have used a reset in their development? Okay, cool. So in CSS, we have these things called resets. And there's two popular ones. We have Meyers Reset and we have Normalize. Now, what resets do is that they strip out all of the default styling that's provided by the browser. So that will give the designer or the developer a clean slate to work with, a clean slate to apply their own styles, however they see fit, to override what the browser user agent is already providing them. Now, it all varies based on browser. So that's why we have a reset to kind of set everything back to a clean slate. In Meyers Reset, we have focus styles, and they're set to 0. But Eric explicitly says, remember to define those focus styles. So ways you can do that is you usually want to call your reset first, bake that in first, so that way the cascade hits that file first, resets everything. And then below that, you add your CSS. Now, depending on what stack you're in, you can be using CSS modules. If you're in React land, you might be using styled components or inline CSS. I don't advise on doing that, but hey, to each their own. If you're in Vue, you're doing scope styles within your Vue component. I'm old school. I like decoupling my front end, so I like keeping everything separate. But you would define those focus styles later down in your own style sheet. That way those will apply and then will reset over the focus outline. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. I see some heads nodding. Sweet. So what about Normalize? Has anyone ever used Normalize in their project before, whether it's personal or work related? Okay. Here's a better question. How many of your company websites or personal websites use Bootstrap? There we go. All right, then you've used Normalize before. If you go through Normalize's CS file and you do a search for focus, you're not going to find it. You will, however, find styles for focus ring, Currently, focus ring is not a thing, so those styles that are being applied, they're using a Moz prefix for the Mozilla browsers. It probably won't work at all. And if you go to the Mozilla Developer Network site or the MDN website, and you'll search for like :Moz-focus ring, you'll find that piece of code in there, but it doesn't work. Even if you tried in Firefox, it doesn't work. And there's even like a warning that says this is not a spec. It doesn't work. You can have fun, play with it all day long, but it won't work. So focus-ring and Moz focus ring were supposed to be the same thing, but focus, they're not. It's not really a thing yet. It's technically now it's called Focus Visible, which was renamed I believe last year or the year before. So focus ring did change to Focus-Visible. It's currently in the CSS4 spec. Let me go back here for a second. It's currently in the CSS4 working draft as a spec status, and there's a Polyfill. I can't demo it on this machine because I forgot to pull the code over, but it's really, really cool. I'll explain how it works. And you can enable that Polyfill through a feature flag in Chrome. So Focus-Visible is now what all of these things were at one point. So the importance of focus. What is so important about focus? We understand the need for it, but why is it so important? There needs to be a way for accessible and non-accessible users to be able to see what they're doing during interactions. Now, a great example is what I was talking about earlier with the login and password inputs. You want to be able to know that is where you are indefinitely in that experience. It indicates that you're on that password field. It indicates that you're on that login field. It really would be a bummer if you started to type your password or your login and you had no visual indication that that's actually where you were typing, because muscle memory, you think you hit tab, you start typing automatically because your password is the same across every single platform, and it's no longer there anymore. So where did your password go? We don't know. Knowing where you are in the experience is crucial. So according to WCAG 2.1, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, it states that any keyboard operable user interface has a mode of operation where the keyboard focus indicator is visible. Now, it says the indicator is visible. It doesn't say it has to be a blue outline. It doesn't say it has to be a gray outline, right? Those styles are afforded by the browser. The browser gives you those automatically. But there has to be some type of visual distinction on the page. So I'll get into the branding and stuff later. But if it doesn't match branding, oh well, we can fix that. A few slides I want to go through right here show kind of how the browsers and focus work. They handle focus differently, both visual representation and functionality, and mouse to keyboard. Very, very cool stuff. So the next couple slides I'm going to show how Chrome handles mouse focus. You kind of get a gray outline. You get an indication that the button was clicked, and then you get a gray outline around that button. These are all native, so they're native input, native button, and a native button with just some styles on it. There's a small caveat here too, because there's styles applied to the click here button. Some of the focus things don't work, so you kind of have to work a little bit of magic to make focus work for buttons, native buttons with styles associated with them. This is how keyboard focus works on Chrome. Just using the tab button, you get gray indicators around everything except, or not except that one, all three of them do. So you get the gray outline around all three, and that's with keyboard users. Firefox, you get the gray outlines around them. You don't get anything, I don't think, for that button. But you could see just the gray indication that the button was clicked. You get a faint gray outline around the input using Firefox and a mouse. Keyboard focus. Now, if you see right there, you go back, you get an indicator, an outline, and you get like an inset dotted focus ring. So it's not handled the same way natively that Chrome would. It's a different experience altogether in Firefox. Safari mouse focus, they have blue. So you get blue, gray, and then you don't really get anything with the native button with the styles on it. Now this next one's a kicker, the way Safari handles keyboard focus. And it blew my mind when I saw it. Apparently it's a huge issue, but this is on Safari. Yeah, good stuff. You focus the window, you tab to the input, you try and tab and focus down to the button, it goes up to the address bar and drops it down. This is unacceptable. Does anybody work for Apple in the room? Okay, cool. That's unacceptable. And apparently this is a known issue. And it's known on Stack Overflow that this happens. And apparently, from what I read, that the fix for this is going up into the Apple logo, preferences or settings, going to the accessibility setting or the Safari setting, and turning this feature off. Why in the hell would we have our users do that? Go through a handful of steps just to do that? That's unacceptable. You should never make your users think at all. Has anybody read Stephen Krug's book, Don't Make Me Think? This is a perfect example. You never want your users to have to think on how to use your experience. That in itself is a bad user experience all the way around. This is Edge. You get a little bit of blue, you get a nice little baby blue, maybe a periwinkle there, and then a small dotted outline around that button. This is Edge 16. I think the latest version of Edge is 17. Plus, Edge just got released Chromium, like a Chromium build on Mac, so that's really cool. We get to use Chrome's dev tools now on Edge. And this is the keyboard focus using Edge. You get a small indication around the input. You get a dotted line and dotted lines around both buttons. So it's kind of interesting how the browsers handle both the presentation and the functionality, depending on where your user's coming from. How many are familiar with Tabindex on the web when they're building out their experiences? Cool. So Tabindex is fun to talk about. Because even though you can, quote unquote, set tab index with a bunch of positive integers, that technically is an anti-pattern. So when you are doing, tab index or setting your tab index, kind of keep it at 0. Because if you set it greater than any integer other than 0, it is an anti-pattern. Keeping it at 0 lets it follow the natural order of the DOM or the document object model. So even if you have everything set to 0 or you don't have anything set, it's still going to go in logical order of the content. If you do have to set tab index 0 to -1, like this, just keep in mind that removes that element from the natural tab order. So you won't be able to tab to it at all with the keyboard. It's still focusable though, even though it is -1. So even though it is removed from the DOM, it'll technically remove from the natural tab order in the DOM, you can still focus to it. But you would just have to use the focus method, which you can do with JavaScript, and have fun with that and be able to focus things back in and out. You see this a lot with like sliding menus in and out navigation, or even like hamburger menus on mobile. You set those to -1, so it's out of the natural tab order, but then you would put a focus method on it so you could focus into that and be able to use those interactive controls. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. This also has to do with focus as well, because tab index and focus kind of go hand in hand. You use the tab with the tab index on your keyboard to go to the different parts of the experience, and focus lets you know that that's exactly where you tabbed in that experience. So we were talking about different types of focus styles earlier, and branding, and working with your creative team and your creative director, your art team, and how if they want you to remove things or remove the focus ring, their concern is about branding. Well, you can match your branding with focus styles. You can change colors of borders and sizes. You can change the background colors. You can change the font family and the font size and the font color. Anything that you want to do with the outline, you can do and match your branding. So this little demo is pretty sweet that I put together. This one right here, it changes the focus outline color to black, the background color to yellow, and the font size to 2 M's. And this is what happens when you focus to it. So it kind of just changes everything. So if these were your colors of your brand, you could change that. I think I go back through and maybe change like outline color to, what do I do? Blue, and maybe, is it red, I think? Orange. So yeah, if your colors for your company, your brand colors were blue and orange, you could change that as well. And you can set the font size. I dropped it down to 1.2 M's. Let's see what else. Oh, I also changed the font family. So like I said, you can do all of these things to match your branding if you want. And your designers might not know, your design team might not know that you can do this. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. Focus Visible is something I really like talking about. I was talking about this earlier. I touched briefly on it. It's currently in the CSS4 working draft. It landed there the 18th of May, I think 2017. It was called Focus Ring, and they had like the Moz Focus Ring, but it was also changed to Focus Visible. It's not in browsers yet. There is a Polyfill out there though. I can't show it to you because I don't have the code on my machine. But if you do want to hit me up, I can direct you to how that works. So when you remove the default focus by assigning a value of 0 or none, like I was saying, you remove it for everybody. Both your keyboard, mouse users, all your assistive technology users. But you don't want to do that. The reason this was created was because some mouse users didn't like having a visual focus ring around custom elements like buttons. So this Polyfill, it removes the visible focus ring from the elements for mouse users. The only real element that it uses is the button element. It removes it for, but it adds it back in for the keyboard users. So it's really, really cool. You can get it here, the Polyfill. It's github.com/wicg/focus-visible. And it's based on heuristics. So the machine, the browser knows whether your user's coming in from the mouse or they're coming in from the keyboard, and then it will remove or add that focus style in. I've had people come up to me after the talks I've given, and when I've demoed this and I've showed this, and they've showed me like open issues and open PRs to implement it because they thought it was so cool that they really wanted to start using the Polyfill before it was actually shipping out there to the browsers. This is kind of how it works. This is a snippet of the CSS. Kind of like how anything that is focused that doesn't have a focus ring, set that outline to none. Like I was saying, this caters to the mouse users. So if a focus ring is set, then it removes it in this whitelist right here. This is a little chunk of the JavaScript from GitHub. You'll see that it has true for everything: text, search, URL, telephone, email, password, number, date, month, week, time, etc. The only thing that isn't in here is the button, because the mouse users didn't need to know that they were interacting with the button. So that has been completely removed from here entirely. So it has the focus ring for all of these, but it removes that for the button. Another one that's really cool, I learned about this earlier last year. Another awesome little CSS pseudo class is called Focus Within. What this does is you can add Focus Within onto like a parent element, like a form, and you can change the background and the color of the text, which is really, really cool. By doing this, when you focus onto like a child element, like an input, that whole parent element gets focus. Excuse me. I thought this was really, really cool. Una Kravitz was tweeting about this last year. That's how I found out about this. If you don't follow Una Kravitz right now, I definitely suggest you do. She's an amazing developer, amazing conference speaker. She's into accessibility as well. But yes, right here, I changed the Focus Within to the background color of red and black. I changed it back to orange. It's really, really cool. It gives you the complete indication that, hey, this is where I'm at in this experience. There's no second guessing. So I thought that's really, really cool. So before I start wrapping up, I do have some awesome people that you can follow. Marcy Sutton being one of them. Marcy Sutton used to work at DQ. DQ, not Dairy Queen, is an accessibility consulting company. They build software for the web. DQ is actually based out of Ann Arbor. Marcy used to work there. Now Marcy is head of learning at Gatsby. Gatsby's a really, really cool product, but definitely follow Marcy. She's all over the world. She speaks on accessibility. That's kind of her jam. Alice Boxhall, she is an engineer at Google. She started working on the Focus Visible Polyfill. Rob Dotson, he's also a engineer at Google, or he's a dev advocate or DevRel at Google. He has a series on the Chrome YouTube channel called Alleycasts, where he talks about different things about accessibility and different like little easy wins or basic intro wins, stuff like that. That's actually where I got the idea for this talk a couple of years ago, was an Alleycasts episode where he was talking about the focus ring and focus visible polyfill. So all three of them, definitely follow all three of them on Twitter if you already don't. And there's a handful of other amazing people out there doing accessibility stuff as well. Leonie Watson, Steve Faulkner, just to name a couple. Some awesome companies to follow, DQ being one, local company, gotta love it for the local companies. The Pacello Group is a really, really cool company. A buddy of mine who is also a blind technologist, Al Pizzoli, he actually worked at MSU as on like one of the technology teams, completely blind person. He works for the Pacello Group now. IBM, they're doing amazing, amazing things in the space. So check them out, follow them, see what they're doing. If you want any of the resources, they're all in a gist. There's just way too many resources to like put on a slide or 2 slides. So if you want to take a picture of that, I'll give everybody a couple seconds to take a picture of that. And then I can also tweet these slides out later as well, if anybody's interested. Everybody good on the picture? Need the resources? Cool, sweet. So you can check out my slides right there at this bit.ly. This thing is getting wonky. This bit.ly link right here. You can check out the CodePen if you want to play with, the focus and the focus within on my CodePen. That's me, Sultan Burnham. Tweet at me, follow me, hit me up if you have any questions. And that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Are there any like frameworks that are particularly good at doing accessibility? Like I know you use Vue, obviously. So are they better, or is there anything like that?
So an issue that we have right now in the accessibility space is that the more and more frameworks that we see out there, the more and more that are coming out there, they're not building accessibility in. So we're having to do more work to bake in the accessibility, and that's both with Vue and React. Angular, it was either Angular or AngularJS was really, really bad at the the accessibility baked into it. Ryan Florence, though, if you don't follow Ryan Florence, he's a really, really cool person. He does a lot of workshops and talks on accessibility. He is still building, I think, a library or framework called Reach, which is an accessibility React framework. So it kind of already has the accessibility kind of built into it on top of React. I haven't really checked it out, but I've heard a lot about it. So that's the only thing I know of right now. But everything else is kind of baked in by other developers to make the experience accessible, because it's just not in those frameworks, and it's making it more difficult for us as developers to integrate that stuff because it's not being thought of from the beginning.
Do any of them do the DOM like particularly bad for any kind of readers? Are you saying?
Not really, because the concept of like the virtual DOM is like a big thing, especially in React, and just the way that you're laying out components in both Vue and React, everything's kind of separated. So I mean, that's really, really cool for componentizing your application. But I haven't really seen too many, things out there that kind of mess with the DOM in a horrendous way. Any other questions?
Well, we appreciate your time, Chris. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast.
All right, awesome. Thank you. How'd that go?